Hey, welcome back to the videos. For the past couple of weeks we've been looking at some more advanced string bending ideas or concepts on the banjo. And I want to add a couple more ideas to this batch of bend ideas that we're talking about. The previous video we looked at some ways to take the number 1 chord shape, which is also called the F shape, and do some pretty cool pedal guitar effects. I want to take that another step further and stay in the confines of that F shape, and I want to do a suspended bend. There are two main types of suspended chords that you hear in most popular forms of music, and that's a suspended second and a suspended fourth, sometimes listed as SUS or SUS4. That just means suspended. And what happens is one of the notes of a major triad, which is the 1, the 3, and the 5 notes out of a scale that represents a major chord, the third note out of those 3, which is the third interval, gets replaced by either the second note in the scale or the fourth note of the scale. So let's use a C here for the example. I'm going to hold the entire chord. To make a C major chord, we have to have a C, an E, and a G. That's the first, third, and fifth notes out of the scale. Okay, so one common way with kind of a bend effect to get a suspended sound is to actually physically bend one of these strings up so that you get a suspended chord sound. So I'm going to do that with the C major chord. I'm going to take the third string where it's being held out of this C formation, and I'm going to bend it up 1/2 step, which in the case of a C chord gives me an E note on the 9th fret of the third string, stretched up with a 1/2 step bend, gives me the same note as the third string at the 10th fret, which in the confines of this chord shape would give you a C suspended fourth. And the way you arrive at that fourth, again, whether you call this a suspended second or suspended fourth, is that you go to the fourth note of the scale, which in the case of a C scale is an F note. So instead of C, E, G, we now have C, G, and an F. And by using the pedal bend effect, you can actually hear the E note being replaced by that suspended fourth, or the F note, which is kind of cool. And you can transition back and forth between the normal C and the major fourth suspended sound. And again, because this is based on the chord shape, anywhere you move it, then you can get that 1/2 step suspended chord sound. So in the case of a D major chord, you would have a D note, you'd have an F sharp, and you would have an A note. D, F sharp, and A make a D major chord. So we want to replace the third note of the triad, which is F sharp, and replace it with the next note above it, which is the fourth note in the scale, which is G. So anywhere you go on the neck, even if you can't remember the notes themselves or whether it's a suspended fourth or not, it's not important in playing terms, but just to help you understand what this is constructed of, that's a little, little chord theory to help you know why you're doing it and why you're getting that sound. But if you can just physically remember to bend that third string a 1/2 step, it would be the same thing as adding the ring finger 1 fret higher. But obviously there's a big difference in the sound effect of adding the note versus bending into the note. And that's the sound you hear a lot in rock, especially 60s and 70s rock phrasing, is adding that suspended fourth chord sound into the chord progression of a song. And obviously if you go too far, then you get into a totally different sound, which we won't go into, but just for practice purposes you can try getting a 1/2 step bend and it gives you a suspended fourth chord sound. So that's another idea to add to the number 1 chord shape. Let's go back to the number 2 shape. A real interesting bend is a way to get a blues bend, which is a flatted 7th tone added to the chord shape. Normally, to add an F note to this G chord, I would have to reconfigure my fingers to try to accommodate finding that F note. In this case, it's going to be over here on the 3rd string at 10. And again, that's another way to express an F dominant 7, a G dominant 7 with adding an F note. Another way to get that sound and to add the pedal bend effect is to bend your way up to an F note. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to modify the number 2 chord shape, which is the D shape, and you'll recognize this as going from G to E minor. So what I'm going to have is an E note on the 3rd string, because this is a G chord we're using for the example, and I'm going to physically bend this E note up to an F note. So what I'm going to, in essence, is a G6 up to a G dominant 7th. Now, if you use that in the context of the whole chord, you would have to move your fingers around in order to navigate. So if I wanted to go from a G major chord to a G6 / E minor to a G dominant 7 or just regular G7, I can use the bend instead of adding the note. Now, again, this is another phrasing that goes into country and rock. I was sitting here, thinking about what to do for the Lick of the Week videos, and I always like to use an example of where you would hear this bend. Listen to this classic example, and you should recognize it from a 60s rock song. That could be a phrase from the Monkey song, Take the Last Train to Clarksville. But when I'm playing these bends, that usually instantly melodies that use this sound pop into my head. And again, we're playing bluegrass for the most part. But if you're playing country, bluegrass, rock, anything on the banjo, some of these bends can come in pretty handy to give you that kind of authentic sound. So this would be considered a flatted 7th bend, or you could call this a 7 bend. You're actually starting out with a 6th tone, but you're just using that as your base of operations to do the 7th bend. And again, because it's based on a chord shape, you can move it anywhere on the neck. Here it is in C, D, and you only have to do a half-step bend to get that effect. If you wanted to do a major 7th bend, you'd have to bend that a whole tone up, which gives you a major 7th, which is a sound you would hear in other kinds of music other than bluegrass and most standard rock. A major 7th does appear in some rock songs, but usually it's that flatted 7th that everybody's hearing. So if you want to do either version, you can do a half-step bend for a flatted 7th or a whole step bend to get a major 7th sound. Okay, and I want to wrap this video up with just one cool idea for a bar chord. There's a lot of cool things you can do with bar chords. Here's one really nice bend effect that you can get out of any bar position. Hold the 1st string out of any bar position, go over to the 3rd string 2 frets higher, and push up on the 3rd string, and you can either do a half-step bend or a whole step, depending on what you like, and you can get a nice pedal bend effect with the 3rd string and the 1st string being played against each other. And again, because it's being based on a bar chord, you can move it anywhere on the neck. So that's a pretty cool effect for a pedal bend. So I'm going to wrap this up with just those few examples. There are a ton of other bend effects waiting to be found, but next video I want to just try to maybe use some of these effects in a solo. So see you next video. Thanks.